seconds away, Jack. Good evening. We still have the disastrous deadlock in the IWA strike. No moves at all. Last night, Keith Bennett presented his mystery proposition. We'll see if Jack Munro knows anything about it. Here's Steve with the rundown.
Rene Levesque. He led the province of Quebec to the brink of separation. And when the people said no, he joined the constitutional talks. It didn't go well.
This is a charade as far as you're concerned?
It's not a charade, it's a bloody rape.
Now he's an author, and he's in the studio with Webster. But first, standoff in the lumber dispute. And the employer says the union is refusing to negotiate.
We made a very, very sincere effort to try and resolve this, and the union didn't budge a quarter of an inch.
Tonight, Jack Munro, president of the IWA.
The strike has been going now 101 days. Keith Bennett of FIR said bluntly to me last night that his people have gone a long way down the path, but that you, Munro, Jack Munro of the IWA, won't budge. Who is the bigger guilty person in this strike? You with your stubbornness, or they with their double talk?
Evening, Mr. Webster.
Just let's get down to business tonight, please. You're not here as a stand-up comic.
You can take your mask off.
I'm telling you, Munro, this will be the last time you'll ever be on this program if you behave like that tonight. I'm deadly serious about this.
I am too, Jack.
And
serious business, right?
Okay. I outlined last night what they want. They want variable working, straight time in the manufacturing plants, straight time for maintenance. They want the compressed work week. They want the unfettered right to implement hours of work schedules
Jack,
and logging.
they want us to basically abandon the hours of work provision of the collective agreement. Go back to, I think you said in the 40s or something. It's probably at least to the 40s, maybe before that. They said, they've used such words, and I think he used it last night. I don't think he understands how bad it is. He wants workers to work smarter. Now, what the hell does that mean? He talks about, he knows that workers in this industry, lots of hard jobs in this industry, he knows that they have to have some rest, so they wouldn't ask anybody to work more than 12 hours. A responsible industry representative, a hired gun for the forest industry of British Columbia, seriously proposing that they're going to ask people to work 12 hours a day. The manufacturing, Jack, 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. It eliminates overtime shift. It means the overtime shift. It eliminates graveyard shift. Graveyard people who work graveyard shift will have their jobs eliminated, maybe have to eke out a living from this industry, working 1 day a week as a casual on Saturdays, working 10 hours. This proposal is so bad, we said there's a hardboard plant down the road here, Canadian Forest Products Hardboard Division in 1966, because it's a pulping process, we negotiated a premium, Wyman here negotiated it, our premium Saturday and Sunday. They get time and a half. There hasn't been a squawk about that plant since 1966, and this industry on Sunday said that plant will go to straight time on Saturday and Sunday.
What he said was he wants you to work variable hours,
right,
and you'd get a 40-hour week, and you'd get overtime
right,
more than 40
right,
hours,
right,
and he wants you to cut back certain of your other practices. Now, how long can the IWA stand this strike?
Jack,
you've already borrowed how much money?
Jack, we're in the process of borrowing an additional $10 million. We've already borrowed about $4 million. The people of this province should get behind the IWA members. Who the hell do the chief executive officers or Keith Bennett think they are? That the people of this province own the trees. These characters that are running these companies for the shareholders, our trees, yours and mine and everybody here and the rest of the people that live in this province, won't say to their employees that they're going to get some job security. And if we talk about job security, you have to agree to a rape of the collective agreement first on hours of work, and then we'll tell you what this secret proposal is. This proposal is so bad from the industry, they won't put it in paper. They will not write it down. We sent the mediator back. We said, look, our notes can't be right. Our notes are, you got to go and get this proposal from the industry on Sunday afternoon on paper so we can read it. The industry refuses. The industry is so embarrassed they won't put it on paper. The Southern Interior, Jack, was there.
Just a minute. You're not as lucid as you normally are. Now, let me try and put it a little bit more succinctly to you. The employers are saying that there is no way they are going to give you what you want unless you are prepared to make concessions on flexibility. Are you prepared to give them 6 hours straight time?
Absolutely. Jack, we said...
6 days straight time.
No, we're not. That is nonsense. They don't have a problem with balancing production, as they call it. This industry invents more goofy words. They talk about, well, all the things they talk about. Conveners and facilitators, and they talked about definitive end position, and now this balancing of production. They can operate on Saturday now for dryers to get their private plants, but they have to pay overtime.
Jack, they have given you what they want. Are you prepared to give them any concessions on flexibility of production and maintenance and accept the continuous processes in the operations?
Jack, yes, we are. That'll surprise you.
How much flexibility are you prepared to give them?
We said if there's a major problem as far as maintenance in these newer plants is concerned on the weekend, we'll look at a weekend shift of maintenance. That's a new move for us.
Straight time.
We said that we would look at longer hours as far as grapple yarders are concerned in the bush. That's what they've been talking about. We said that we would look at the different hours, and we would look at and talk about some different shifts as far as logging is concerned, Jack. And we sent that to them by a mediator, and this is what we got back. A destruction of the hours of work provision, Jack, and all in return for what we want Keith Bennett to stop saying and stop doing. If a cleanup guy's job is vacated because the guy retires, the industry says, and they said it on a radio program about 2 weeks ago, they want the right to bring a contractor in to do that cleanup job at a quarter of the rate. That's what this whole thing is about.
But you're telling me that you're prepared to give them some flexibility on maintenance?
Right, on the weekend.
Are you prepared to work Saturdays at straight time?
Jack, there was a proposal around, I think, from Crown Forest Products that they wanted us to work 12 hours, 12 hours, and 12 hours on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And our guys work hard, and we said it doesn't make sense. You can't get guys to hammer away at 12 hours. They maybe an overtime shift or something. We said we'll work 10 hours, 10 hours, and 10 hours.
Let's get to some simple questions. How long do you think this strike can last? Obviously, Van der Zalm, if this goes on in November, will have to legislate you back to work. Is that not correct?
Jack, if he's going to legislate anything, he should legislate that the bargaining unit is made up of people and of jobs. And when we become certified, we become certified for a unit made up of people and of jobs. That's what Hank Hutchins said.
Now, the other thing is that he said last night, and he was obviously quite sincere about it, that things are so bad for them and for you, the employers and the union, that they're prepared to go back to work now on the rollover of the present contract. Why can't you do that?
Jack, because we're walking away from our jobs if we do that. That means that a person working in the backbone of the economy of British Columbia's #1 industry couldn't go and get a mortgage. Because if you went and got a mortgage, you're going to lose your house because you're going to be out on the street because somebody is going to come along and bid a lower price to do your job.
You have misunderstood me. Bennett sat here last night for FIR and said he's prepared to have you back to work under the present contracts, no changes.
But they're contracting out everything now. That's why we're on strike. They want us to abandon the strike and go back to work the way we were working so they can continue to contract out.
But you haven't lost that many jobs over contracting out. It's what you're afraid of.
Jack, in the southern interior, in logging alone, in one area in the southern interior, we've lost 500 jobs in the last 4 years. Well, the mills are operating. They're running to beat hell, and all the logging in the southern interior, with the exception of 150 people, is now done by contracting.
Let me try something else again, then.
And now they want to do it in the manufacturing
Supposing
plants.
you give them your proposals on flexibility, that's your straight-time maintenance, right? And perhaps some variable hours of work. Supposing you give them that. What do you want in the way of a guarantee against contracting out?
Jack, we want the jobs in the forest industry that are presently IWA jobs and new jobs that if they come into the bargaining unit continue in the IWA and be there available for IWA members. We want IWA members to be able to serve an apprenticeship and become a tradesman and work as a tradesman, not work pulling lumber someplace while somebody else is on unemployment insurance because there are tradesmen coming in on the weekend to do the job of the tradesman.
Do you still have the backing of your membership? You've got 20-odd thousand now on strike now.
Overwhelming. The conference that we had, Jack, on Wednesday of this week surprised me. I actually felt good on Thursday, in spite of a very tough situation, that the membership are so determined they are not going to walk away from their jobs, and they shouldn't have to walk away from their jobs. And this premier should get some advice. And if he's going to do anything, he shouldn't be hammering the workers. Everybody that's been involved in, including him, has agreed that we're right. Now, he got whipsawed by the chief executive officers, but we're right.
Well, it's a very depressing situation. We'll go to the phones after the break. Just to clear one thing up, Keith Bennett said if you drop your demand for contracting out, they'll drop their demand for flexibility at the moment, and you can both go back to work. Is it not about time that was considered?
Jack, that is so bad. No, the short answer is no.
Okay.
No, it should not.
Go ahead from Mackenzie, BC.
Yes, Mr. Webster, just some information for yourself and Mr. Munro. Conifer in North has a contracting out clause, and Mr. Bennett said yesterday they couldn't give it to the same thing to the coast because they have to be more competitive, and the North is. We are Local 18 BCFP operation, PPWC in Mackenzie. The company has told us up here that they will not give us a contracting out clause. We have given them trades flexibility. We've even discussed hours of work flexibility, and they already told us that they were not prepared to give us any contracting out protection up here. So this is what would be in a secret envelope for Mr. Munro at such time as he goes along with the flexible hours.
Yeah. And this is what's going on out there, Jack. The people, the way we're going to win this strike, I think, is the people of the province have to start raising hell about what's going on. We should have an inquiry into the saneness of people who are running this industry. This Mackenzie, PPWC, not our union, there's 60 guys in the log yard. They want to contract out the log yard. They say, well, don't worry, we'll put those guys in the mill. But the junior guys in the mill are going to go out on the street.
Fair enough. Thanks very much, sir. From Fort St. John, go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Munro, just what do you think you are doing for the members by keeping them out, letting them lose everything they've ever had? They're losing thousands over this strike, and I see no reason why people cannot work on a Saturday and Sunday. Most everybody that does work 5 days a week doesn't want to work on Saturdays and Sundays. Anyway, and also why, for people that are not in favor of your strike, why are they not able to get any money from your union here?
Okay.
Well, we're paying.
You can't get UIC, you can't get welfare, you have to go to the union, and if you don't believe in the strike, you're not allowed to get any money from you.
Okay, go ahead, Jack.
If you're a member of the IWA and do your picket duty, then certainly you're entitled to strike relief. And it isn't very much, and believe me, I understand a lot of people are hurting, and we don't want the strike to last this long. It's the employers that are the problem, not the union. The employers want the right to boot us out on the street anytime they decide to.
By the contracting out provisions, you'd say.
Right. The Northwood just fired 100 loggers just before we get into negotiations. We negotiated some severance pay for them, so they say that's not contracting out. But the logging is happening.
What about the other aspect, though, which a lot of people mention, by keeping them out and strike so that they lose everything they have?
Jack, we don't want that to happen, and they shouldn't lose anything. People, because they stand up for their rights, shouldn't have to lose their homes. They should go and certainly talk to to welfare, to the banks. The banks have been really good with this. They're not foreclosing on people.
Go ahead, please.
Good evening, gentlemen. Couple of points. First of all, I saw Mr. Bennett's interview last night, and I was impressed with the fact that Mr. Bennett actually answered the questions as Mr. Webster put them to him. He answered the questions to Mr. Webster's satisfaction. However, this evening, what I am finding is that Mr. Munro is not answering the questions as Jack is putting them to him. He is coming back with...
I'm so damn frustrated. You may be right.
With paraphrasing, of course, gentlemen. And I'm finding one fault on Mr. Webster's side is he isn't following up
we're going to get
Mr. Munro to answer the questions. Per se, on his question of on Mr. Webster's question, whether or not how long does he think the strike will last?
I don't know. It depends on the employer.
What I asked you was, how long do you think you can be out on strike? You can't go all through the winter on it.
Jack, we have to win this strike. If we walk away from this strike, the job security of any worker in British Columbia, regardless of what union they belong to, is going to be up. Yeah, right.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to say that the companies that are out on strike right now are not controlled within BC. They are all either New Zealanders, the Americans, or they're all controlled back in Eastern Canada.
New Zealand, throw New Zealand in, Tokyo. Our friend Zimmerman from Toronto and Montreal and Tacoma, Washington. And
you're not suggesting that they don't have problems, Jack, are you? They've got problems. They're trying to compete in the American market.
Jack,
they point out
guys,
the wage cuts in the United States, and they say they've got to be more efficient, and that they can't go along with any of your, quote, feather-bedding practices.
Jack, I'll bet you a buck to a hole in the donut when these guys release their third quarter figures this coming week, that they're almost record profits, after we've been on strike for 3 months.
Because of the pulp prices.
Right. Pulp has gone from 300 and something to 500 and something. You know that the Southern Interior employers, Jack, and the Northern Interior employers phoned us and wanted to have a meeting. They said they had enough. I said, look, we're not playing games with you guys. They said, we've had enough. We want to come and we want to negotiate a settlement. We said, okay. We set up a meeting for a Friday. In the meantime, the Premier got involved. We got a phone call from the Southern Interior, John Todman, and a phone call from the operators in the Northern Interior, and said the Premier has asked us to cancel those meetings. He wants us to do everything together as an industry. When we met with the Premier, I said, what the hell did you get those guys to cancel the meetings for? He said, that is nonsense. He never asked anybody to cancel a meeting. So not only have we got difficulties with what's down the road as far as this strike is concerned, we're dealing with employers in the Southern Interior who can't tell the truth.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering, when the union has a strike vote, is it secret or is it
secret?
Just a show of hands?
No, secret ballot conducted at the operations.
Is that done by the entire membership?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
In other words, you had a
how's that for a quick answer?
You had a mandate to strike the whole union, but you only chose to strike those employers who would not go along with your temporary no contracting out provisions, right?
Yep.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Hello. I would just like to comment. I feel that Jack Munro and the radical IWA members are a bunch of greedy, self-centered mongrels. First of all, the shift work problem. I am a shift worker myself, and I feel that the shift work is a non-issue.
What's
and
a mongrel?
second of all, this contracting out issue. Who says I believe that a person should earn their own job security? I think that a person should work hard, and I don't feel that job security should be a God-given right.
Okay, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Absolute nonsense. She probably voted so good.
Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'd like to say, what kind of future do you think BC will have if Van der Zem forces IWA back to work?
Not much. Not much from the workers' point of view.
Well, I'd just like to say I'm right behind you there, Mr. Munro.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Go ahead from Squamish. Go ahead from Squamish.
Oh, good evening, Mr. Webster.
Evening, ma'am.
I have a question for Mr. Munro, and then I'll ask it and I'll hang up to hear the response.
Right.
Mr. Munro, I wanted to know, at the time that the strike vote was taken,
yes,
my husband was working in Stewart, and he was not given an opportunity at that time to vote. And after, we tried to find out why he wasn't given that opportunity. There were about, I don't know how many guys were up there, probably about 10 or 12 guys in this particular outfit. And he goes around from camp to camp. And there are 3 other camps that I know of now that definitely did not vote for
on the strike.
They weren't given an opportunity to vote yes for it or no for it.
Maybe.
And I just explanation of that. I'll hang up now, okay? Thank you for your help.
You should hang up. Jack, maybe the IWA has got some goofy leaders, and maybe it's got some goofy officers, and maybe it goes on some goofy TV programs, but you can't criticize the IWA for the way we vote. It costs us thousands and thousands of dollars to take a ballot box to, I think, almost every operation that's affected by a strike. It's government supervised. These laws in this province now say that you have to have a government supervisor or their designate to make sure that the guy or the person goes and marks the ballot and all the rest of this stuff. You cannot criticize our voting procedure. That's one thing in the IWA that we are squeaky clean on.
Let me just sum up briefly. The industry has given you a number of radical demands. You have not moved in any way face-to-face with them to meet any of their flexibility. Is that right?
No, that's not right, Jack. Jack, we've said we'll meet your problem on weekend maintenance, and we will talk about different hours and different shifts in the logging section of the industry.
And having told them that, has the industry given you a hint of what they will offer you on contracting out protection, having, as they say, come down a long way down the path?
Mr. Bennett said last night that they have gone a long way down the path, and unless we capitulate, we aren't going to find out what that means. It is absolutely absurd. Another thing Mr. Bennett said last night was about the pension plan, that our demand for a pension plan is breaking new ground. That is nonsense. He's on a pension plan similar to what we're demanding. They have
agreed to pensions at 60 with no discount.
First part of the demand. The other thing for your listeners, Jack, and nobody can seem to remember it very long, officers of the IWA, including Jack Munro, when we're in a strike situation, do not get paid.
A very depressing interview with Jack Munro, leader of the IWA. Absolutely no movement in sight. And it's middle of November before Van der Zalm, if he does, can order the IWA back to work on the present contract basis, right?
That isn't going to solve anything. Can you imagine putting 20,000 people back into the plants after the industry has beat the hell out of them with the help of a right-wing government? Do you think this industry will work, Jack?
That's Jack Munro for tonight. Next. A pleasant interview with Rene Levesque after the break.
I'll see. I'll see. We'll see.
Wait a minute. God, Munro was not on form tonight.
He looked like he was kind of
He's not
down.
drinking. He's not drinking.
No, he was down in the sense of tired.
They're going to beat that'd be disastrous if they smash the IWA.
But I could see yesterday that it's also hurting many other sectors. So.
It's a disaster, really.
But, I don't know chapter and verse about it. I just listen and try and...
Yeah, no, you've got the right sense of it. Trudeau, Marchand, Pelletier,
15 seconds.
And
yeah.
I'm talking about 1960.
Okay.
10 seconds.
Never did I think I would one day sit in my studio interviewing Rene Levesque as the author of a book. Because to us on the West Coast, Rene Levesque for so many years was the winner every which way he went. And I think it was one of his colleagues, Claude Charon, who said, explaining today's situation, Levesque was the way French Canada is, Trudeau is the way they wanted to be. Monsieur Levesque, yeah. I get a strong feeling from your book that relationships from you towards Trudeau were really close to hatred.
No, no, absolutely not. No, to get back to that Charon quote of yours, very simply, in a sense, it's probably true, because Trudeau came from a rather illustrious, well, let's say,
establishment,
circles. And all that jet set appearance, which doesn't detract from the fact he was a very brilliant man and all that, but all that jet set and, easy success is something anybody would dream about.
Except that on page 333 you say, and I've got it engraved in my mind just about.
That brings us back, okay.
In the constitutional crisis, you say, we had been betrayed in secret by men who hadn't hesitated to tear up their own signatures, tricked by Trudeau, dropped by all the others.
You're summarizing, but I think it's basically true. But out of that comes no hatred or anything close to it. On a personal basis, I was never close to Trudeau. We were with common friends like Pelletier and Marchand, Laurando, who unfortunately, the B&B Commission, who was
In fact, in 1960, when you were first enticed away from the honest business of being a reporter to join Lesage's quiet revolution, you were the only one of those four who accepted the offer to run.
Yeah, for various reasons. I think a guy like Trudeau was leaning, if anywhere, towards Ottawa from way back. But Marchand, Pelletier were closer to Quebec, but they just made up a trio, and they waited until their chance came in Ottawa.
Now, you don't put this in your book, but I'd like you to try and give me a little scenario of where an independent Quebec would be today had you won the referendum, had you been able to separate.
Where it would be?
Yeah.
Well, it would be, in many ways, testing new powers, new ways of organizing, our institutions, but in no way dramatically change because economically or otherwise, but learning from everything that from now on would be our own decision centers to get ahead faster, that's for sure. And Canada, I think, if we could swallow it eventually, Canada would have a hell of a good chance to reorganize a lot of things that need reorganizing in the institutional framework without the sort of roadblock which Quebec always is.
It's most appropriate that you're here today when there's a most incredible explosion in the West from establishment people about the billion-dollar contract going to Canadair and Montreal, which people in the West appear to feel is just Mulroney making sure that he's going to come back up in the polls in Quebec. A brutal, selfish allocation of resources to Quebec when Bristol Aerospace and Winnipeg had competed with the best bid but are left out in the cold for political reasons.
That, honestly, I don't know, technically, whether it was all that better tender or not as good a tender. I know one thing, that compared to Montreal, Winnipeg, or other places in Canada in aerospace, because that was Montreal was and still is number one, I think, basically in that, and tackling new technology and spin-offs from that, I think makes sense in the best aerospace in Canada. That's the center. The other thing, political, possible political aspects of the decision, I can't judge. But I'll remind you of one thing, if you don't mind. People on the street that are anywhere in the know and haven't forgotten everything, remember that the F-18, which is now the CF-18, was promised as one of the great job builders where we're supposed to get 50%. That was during referendum time. And right smack in the middle of that campaign, guys from the federal level came to Quebec and working for the no side of the referendum also threw in that we'd get, guaranteed 48%, the exact figure, of anything, jobs, contracts that came out of that purchase of F-18s. We never saw it. So now, for weeks on end, that people have been hearing about this bloody contract about maintenance, and they say, well, people say, I just report, people say, well, it would be one chance, that's a popular reaction, would be one chance of making up for that ploy, that bloody lie that we were told 5 or 6 years ago. But that doesn't touch the merits of the question. That will have to be explained, as any government should.
Sure, you got very mad indeed during the referendum when the feds were spending all these millions and millions of dollars to brainwash the people of Quebec.
Yeah, that's true. We were a bit naive. Yeah, they did try to brainwash people.
Well, they did. You lost the referendum.
No, there was a basic underlying reason, I guess, that we weren't ready yet. But eventually something could happen that would show us that we are ready. Self-confidence is growing.
Do you think separatism will still come in Quebec?
If you want to call it that, separatism, okay, I'll go along with you.
But what else can you call it out here on the West Coast?
You're right. out here on the West Coast,
sure,
or anywhere outside Quebec, I think I'll buy it, because there is an aspect of separating, as far as institutions are concerned, the federal system. But to us, it is a positive thing. Call it independence, call it just as full as possible self-government. We need, I think eventually we'll find out that with self-confidence building in Quebec, now with ups and downs, but building, we'll find out that we need more breathing space, and we need not to negotiate and hassle forever about some basic decisions that we need.
So what you need is a good federal-provincial agreement giving Quebec more independence.
Well, eventually, look, if there is that kind of fuller autonomy leading eventually to something else, but we need it. I think we're going to find out we need it more and more, and I see what the constitutional business, you know, which is a filler for media because people are not interested in it, really. I see what it leads to. It leads to a lot of paperwork, which will probably be going on for another 2, 3, 5 years, but it doesn't touch the central problem, which is we need more decision-making of our own at home.
But most of us in the underprivileged parts of the country, what we need is more lolly from the federal government. We want the jobs, we want the money.
Well, you know, getting back to that F-18 thing, or CF-18, whatever it is, I heard one guy in Ottawa, because there's a lot of lobbying going on from all over the place, it's obvious in anything like that, telling you in BC that if Canadair came to Montreal instead of Winnipeg, maybe another big contract as a trade-off would come to Vancouver.
But mind you, at the same time, we've got to be happy when we see Mr. Mulroney spend $150 million in Manicouagan and an extra $41 million to put a prison in Port Cartier, don't we?
Yeah, but that is something
that's
which...
usual, routine.
And honestly, unfortunately, it smacks of traditional patronage, but inside Quebec. In other words, the bloody jail was supposed to be in Drummondville, Quebec. Now it's supposed to go to Port Cartier in his riding. It'll cost more. I don't think it's very attractive as a gesture, but it doesn't deprive anyone outside of anything.
Let's get back to your career after the break. Did you ever feel that there was real resentment against you and the PQ when you were riding high from the rest of the country?
Sometimes, yes. Well, there was more than resentment. There was real people that were up in arms against what, let's say me, or what we stood for. And when I came out, which I didn't see any reason not to do, I got hell about what I was standing for. But it's a democratic, basically, we're still a democratic country, staunchly one. Basically, I didn't feel it had to do with personal animosity so much, except some occasional cases. It had to do with fighting against what we stood for.
You overdid the language bills in Montreal. No. Yes, you did. Did you not?
No, we didn't. And you can read back. Look, one thing I'll tell you, very simply. The language bill preserves the chances of our language, especially in the working place, because after all, if your language and your culture become some sort of museum piece and you need another language in order to get ahead in your own homeland, in your own home, that is poisonous. So it is not so much the defense as the promotion of French language. But did it take away basic rights from anyone?
It seemed stupid at the time. From a far distance, when English language signs were banned, it seemed silly.
Well, look, I was
and the school business, too.
No. The language, hold it for a second, if you will. The language sign part of it really applies, because we don't need anything like that anywhere else. The law is there, but it doesn't matter. It's all French, the rest of Quebec, practically. So it applies in Montreal. Okay. I was in Toronto recently, a few days ago, and I was looking around, and we suddenly noticed, we said, well, what the hell? I haven't seen a word of French except airport French, you know, for the federal legislation. I haven't seen a word of French, and I don't feel bad about it, because this is a showcase of Toronto. It's an English-speaking city. That's the way it should be. Well, Montreal is basically a French-speaking city, downtown Montreal especially. And our showcase has to be clean in the sense of reflecting us first.
But you must have felt very unhappy when people were caught and firms were caught fleeing from Quebec because of the language and the inability to get their kids into schools of their choice.
Yeah, but look, I've always read and followed, as much as I could, English media, either English Montreal or outside. And for some few years, leading to referendum through Bill 101, the distortion about Quebec was enough to literally make your hair stand on end. What's left of it? It were scare stories.
But don't forget that,
you know, would you believe me if I say that over the last 3-4 years, some of the people that were kind of driven off by nerves, literally, because they have their roots in Quebec, English speaking, 200 years of history, and we've lived together, have come back because they found out that finally, you know, with the scare gone, that it was more than livable as ever. And on the other hand, it was a bit more harmonious all over the place, and they've come back because that's their home.
what about, was the implementation of the War Measures Act by Trudeau his biggest single sin in Quebec?
I think as far as democracy is concerned, not just about Quebec, that in other parts of the world they had, at that same time or thereabouts, they had the same kind of terrorism, but much more serious. And solidly democratic governments never went to a sort of wartime setup and War Measures Act and bringing in the army in Montreal, for instance, during the night so that everybody, rooms would shake and everybody would feel, my God, war is on. That was one hell of an anti-democratic and I think shameful chapter of Canadian political history.
Well, separatism can come back, you tell me, under a new leader, because you've retired from politics now, huh?
From standing for any election, yes. I haven't retired from being politically involved as a citizen, but yeah, I won't stand for elections anymore. But it will come back in the sense, there is, you know, with ups and downs like everywhere, there is a momentum of development, new generations, that's what we work for 25 years, new generations that are in the mainstream of what's happening, not just in Quebec, but throughout the world in many ways as never before. And they come back, you know, knowing more about the world, penetrating markets, they create enterprises. In many ways, we've made so much progress that I think I look sometimes at another planet when I look from the standpoint of 25 years ago. But that will lead, I think, to a need for more self-government because you hit the wall eventually. The more you expand and the more you develop, you hit the wall of a system which wasn't built for us.
Was it not, however, the economic recession, which you describe very graphically in your book, which really killed the PQ? Fear, insecurity,
you mean
jobs.
Election-wise?
Election-wise.
Yeah, I think that was the real coffin nail, apart from the fact that after close to 10 years, this was the second mandate, and no government in Quebec, contrary to Ontario, it takes them half a century to make up their minds about changing governments. In Quebec, it's become a sort of tradition that after 2 mandates, they've seen enough of you. So,
just to gossip before I go to the phones, what do you think of Chrétien as the future Prime Minister of the nation? Is he well accepted in Quebec?
It's curious. You seem to be more exercised. It's because maybe there's that sort of convention or whatever, or, you know,
leadership review
among the Liberal Party. People seem in the media, because I don't know about public opinion, but they seem to be more exercised about this whole business about Turner, Chrétien review than I've noticed anywhere in Quebec.
And you don't think it really matters at all? Which one of them leads the Liberal Party?
Well, I could have my opinions on that, but I'd rather we go to the phone calls.
You know, just have one more thing to say. I always said, even when I didn't know you, you're a social democrat.
Well, I'd accept that definition. Yeah.
Even if not an NDP, you're a social democrat.
Well, we always felt closer to the, let's call them, quote-unquote, progressive wings of other parties, including the NDP from way back, yeah.
If you hadn't gone to Lesage, but you'd gone federal for the NDP, might you have been the Prime Minister of Canada?
No, because I had an offer from a guy I think everybody respects. He came down to Montreal in the 50s. He was still going strong, Stanley Knowles. In a sense, I'm an admirer of him from way back. And he offered me, among others, I suppose, to stand for the NDP. And I wasn't feeling ready for anything like that. But apart from that, Ottawa, to me, has no appeal.
Go ahead to Rene Levesque. Go ahead.
Just wanted to say welcome. Am I on the air?
Yes, you are.
Rene Levesque. But I did want to say, Jack, to the woman who called the unionists greedy, if they are, they've had excellent teachers in the millionaires.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
That's a good one.
That's apropos, not of you. Go ahead, please.
Good evening, Jack, and good evening, Mr. Levesque.
Good evening.
Welcome to Vancouver. I hope you don't find this question too personal, but would you mind telling me how many cigarettes you smoke?
Look, ma'am, I would probably literally be devastated if I knew, so I've never counted. I know I go into a third pack every day, something like that.
Do you find there a lot of controversy from your colleagues and people around you because you do?
Oh, I'm beginning to feel like an outcast.
Thank you, so am I, but that's enough of that call. More after the break. There was one word you used describing Trudeau, which I had to look up. Tartuffe.
At some moments, but if you know your French classics, it doesn't apply to all of Trudeau by any means, but at some moments he did use hypocrisy, and Tartuffe is...
Molière?
Molière for hypocrisy.
And you called him the Prince.
Well, yeah, well, that's an old...
Go ahead from Lake Cowichan.
This evening.
That's your party line. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, my question is for Mr. Levesque. Mr. Levesque, is there anything in your book regarding why your government, when you were in power, hired Pete Rose, a terrorist?
Who?
Pete Rose.
Pete Rose.
One of the Rosies.
No, we never...
One of the people that was involved in the James Cross killing?
No, you're talking, I think, about an incident, which I mentioned in the book, yes, about Jacques Rose, one of the Rose brothers,
right,
who was at liberty, in other words, was free to act like any other citizen by that time, and he was never hired, which, if he'd had any talent, any competence, and passed an exam, could have happened, but he was just a member that joined the party, that's all, eventually.
But there was another one, the guy who wrote the book, the white...
Well, look, for instance... Yeah, well, I'm sorry. Yes, go on, please.
No, we'll leave him alone.
Okay. No, for instance, I had one of my assistants during the last year and a half of in my office for public relations, a hell of a good newsman, whose name is Lamoureux. And in 1963, when he was 20 or 21, he was one of those bomb, the letterbox bombs.
Right.
Oh, so he went to jail, so he paid his
debt to society and came back again.
What the hell? He's got a right to live.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, how you doing?
No bad.
I just first of all like to commend both of you on your lovely jobs and roasting your friend and mine, Mr. Crosby. I thought that was great. My question is to Mr. Levesque. In Jean Chrétien's book, he's explains on page 24 of the paperback edition a lunch that you guys are having sometime in 1964, where you're telling him, when you were asking him to leave federal politics and come to the province of Quebec, and you told him that he had no future in Ottawa because Ottawa in 5 years wouldn't exist for us. Now, he says that was the first time that he ever realized that you were a separatist, or that you had those separatist feelings. Now, what I'm...
He's got a hell of a lot of hindsight, because I haven't read his book. I wanted to keep away from books like that while I was writing one, because if you start arguments on paper, it becomes dull like hell.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just curious. When was the point when you realized that separatism was the answer for Quebec? Well,
hold it. I'll just go back to your Chrétien answer very briefly. I was delegated by Lesage, my boss at the time, to find a candidate for the Shawinigan riding, which eventually became Chrétien's federal riding. And people were asking, look around for candidates for a by-election, and I went, among others, to see Chrétien. He was waiting for something else, which eventually became federal, and he wasn't ready to leave his law practice. That's as much as I remember. What was the other part?
When did you actually realize that you were going to go for separatism with the PQ?
It doesn't happen all of a sudden, but in a sense, I came to my personal conclusion in 66, 67, after we got kicked out of the 1960s Lesage government, and a few of us, and then more of us, got together to figure out, well, where do we go from here? And from the experience of the 6 years in government and what was going on, we finally came to the conclusion that full self-government was the only answer.
But the people of Quebec didn't buy it.
Well, many more than a lot of people would like to think, bought it, and some very young of the new generations, which is always a minority to start with, are preparing what I think is a return of the tide in a different way. It's up to them.
If I were a sensational Daily News reporter, I'd say Levesque predicts upsurge of separatism.
If I won't buy your separatism, upsurge of the drive towards full self-government in Quebec, yes, it will come.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yes?
Good evening, Jack.
Uh-huh. Carry on, please.
Good evening, Jack.
Carry on, please.
Good evening, Jack.
Good evening. Good night, sir. Go ahead, please.
Good evening, Mr. Levesque.
Yeah.
You personally must be pleased with the CF-18 decision by the government.
I can't say I'm... I feel exactly the opposite as what
time when
Howard Powley must be feeling now.
Owned.
Sorry. Say that again.
At the time of the referendum issue, going back to around 79, 80, when General Dynamics still owned Canadair, they were pressuring you personally, the government of Quebec, to put pressure on the Canadian government to purchase the F-16, which was built by General Dynamics.
That's right.
Is it not so? But at the same time, I believe that in the choice on the F-18, the threat of the referendum was being held over Mr. Trudeau's head. And I think it was a panic situation at the time by the Canadian government, brought up that figure of 48% in future contracts, but it was not cast in cement.
No. Eventually, we found out that it was a sort of ballpark figure which had been invented on account of all that pressure. But it's still a bloody lie. That's all.
Go ahead, please. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
That's you, ma'am. Go ahead.
I miss you, Rene Levesque.
Well, here I am. Thank you very much.
I miss Quebec. You know, you talk about separation in two different countries. You know, it really is. Quebec is one country, and the rest of Canada is very, very different.
In many ways.
In many ways, and I think living out of Quebec, you realize what depth and purpose the French really do have and care so much for their culture, for what they have, and how wonderful it really is. And when you come to, I lived in Ontario and now in British Columbia, they have many problems, but really it isn't at how one feels in one's heart as one felt in Quebec.
Fair enough, ma'am.
Well, I'll buy that.
Breathes there a man with soul so dead? Go ahead, please. From Williams Lake.
Hello?
Yes, you, sir.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Levesque about free trade and what he thinks the Mulroney government's doing to it.
Do you care about free trade? I doubt it.
Eventually, I think we should all be free traders. I think the roadblock is in the more or less built-in privilege situation, which is a historical thing, of Ontario, because I think practically all over, as long as we have some transition period, eventually we should go to free trade.
Eventually, but
we can tackle it.
We're being tackled by the Americans right now with disastrous economic results in British Columbia.
Midterm election, protectionism, I mean, you know, things will settle. It's a very bad situation, but eventually what I mean is we should have free trade.
Rene, I've got to tell people that you're going to be autographing books tonight, and I've lost a wee bit of paper.
It's Woodward's.
Woodward's Oak Ridge at 7:30. Okay. And you'll stand there patiently and you'll sign the books for people.
That's the most fascinating part of this tour. If you're not pushed around too much, you meet a cross-section.
My thanks to Rene Levesque.
And thanks to you, Monsieur Webster.
I don't feel it's
maybe less than before.
What time have we got? No, it was most. From the sublime to the ridiculous. At Eagle Ridge Elementary School last night, the best pumpkinella was this impersonation of Jack Webster. I may sue, but my thanks to Robin Gilmer of grade 7 who did this. Well, I don't know about tonight's program at all, but Monday for sure, I'm going to have the adoption triangle, which is a very dramatic human story. Monday, Webster, 5 p.m. precisely. Stay tuned for the news hour.
Happy Halloween, kiddies!